I returned from my 2-week vacation to find a sold sign stabbed into my front lawn. Confused, I tried my key in the lock, but it wouldn't turn. A stranger opened the door, claiming to be the new owner. Panicking, I called my mother, who casually confirmed she had sold my house to pay off my sister Amanda's gambling debts. "It was necessary," she said coldly. "Family comes first." The world seemed to tilt sideways as the realization hit me. My own mother had betrayed me in the worst possible way. The Seattle rain pelted my rental car windows as I drove aimlessly through the city streets, still unable to process what had happened. 2 weeks ago, I had left for Hawaii, ecstatic about my first real vacation in 3 years. The architectural project I had been leading was finally complete, and my boss had practically forced me to take time off. "Lionel," he had said, "if you don't use these vacation days, you'll lose them. Go somewhere warm. You've earned it." At 34, I had finally felt like I was exactly where I wanted to be in life. My career as an architectural consultant was thriving. After years of 60-hour work weeks and countless sacrifices, I had managed to save enough for a down payment on my dream house 2 years ago. It wasn't a mansion by any means, but it was mine. A charming 3-bedroom craftsman with original hardwood floors and a small but perfect backyard where I had started planting a garden. Every mortgage payment felt like an achievement, a testament to how far I had come despite everything. Growing up hadn't been easy. When I was 14, my father died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving my mother Judith to raise my sister Amanda and me alone. Even before his death, the family dynamic had been clear. Amanda was the golden child, and I was the one expected to be responsible, to need less attention and support. My mother had always justified her favoritism with excuses like, "Amanda is more sensitive," or "she needs extra help," or my personal favorite, "You're so independent, Lionel. You don't need as much from me." After Dad died, the disparity grew even more pronounced. Our middle-class lifestyle quickly deteriorated as we learned my father had left significant debt. While my mother scrambled to find work with only a high school education, I took on paper routes and bagged groceries after school to help with expenses. Amanda, 4 years younger than me, was protected from these realities. "Let her be a child," my mother would say whenever I suggested my sister should help too. I worked through high school and took out loans for college, while my mother somehow found money to send Amanda to dance classes and summer camps. When it came time for my sister to attend college, my mother took out a second mortgage on our family home to pay for Amanda's tuition at a private university. Meanwhile, I worked 2 jobs while attending state school, graduating with a degree in architecture and $20,000 in student loan debt. Despite everything, I loved my family. I had accepted long ago that my mother and I would never have the close relationship she shared with Amanda, but I still called her weekly and visited on holidays. I tried to maintain a relationship with my sister too, though her constant financial crises and drama made it challenging. When I finally purchased my house, it represented more than just property ownership. It was a symbol of my resilience, my ability to rise above the circumstances of my childhood and create something beautiful for myself. I had invited my mother and sister to my housewarming party, hoping they might finally see me as successful in my own right. My mother had looked around with pursed lips and said, "It's nice, but don't you think it's a bit much for just one person?" Amanda had asked when I was going to get the kitchen renovated, because it looked totally outdated. Still, I persisted in trying to maintain our family bond. A week before my vacation, Amanda had stopped by unexpectedly. Looking back, I should have noticed how her eyes lingered on the framed house deed I kept on my office wall, how she asked casual questions about my home insurance and where I kept important documents. I even showed her my clever hiding spot, a small safe built into the wall behind a painting in my home office, where I kept the original deed, a spare set of keys, and other important papers. I remember joking, not that I need to hide anything from anyone, but it came with the house and seemed cool to use. I had given my mother a spare key years ago for emergencies, just in case. I had told her, never imagining she would use it to access my safe and take my property documents while I was lying on a beach in Hawaii, blissfully unaware that my life was being dismantled. The most shocking part was that I had just spoken to both of them 4 days earlier. I had called from my hotel room, excited to tell them about the stunning sunset I'd witnessed and the local food I'd tried. Neither had mentioned a word about selling my house. My mother had simply said, "That's nice, honey. Amanda and I are having dinner together tonight. We miss you." The conversation had been so normal that the betrayal felt even more surreal. As I pulled into the parking lot of a budget hotel, I felt my phone vibrate. A text from Amanda. "Mom told me what happened. Don't be so dramatic. You can stay with us until you find a new place." No apology, no acknowledgement of the magnitude of what they had done. Just the expectation that I would accept this unthinkable betrayal and move on. I checked into the hotel room, sat on the edge of the bed, and felt the weight of the truth I had never wanted to face. The two people who should have loved me the most had never truly valued me at all. The next morning, I drove to my mother's modest ranch house in the suburbs, determined to understand how she could have possibly justified selling my home. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Amanda's red Volkswagen parked there too. Of course she would be there. They were probably planning their defense together. I knocked rather than using my key, suddenly feeling like a stranger. My mother opened the door, her expression a mixture of defiance and something else. Pride, perhaps? As if she had accomplished something worth celebrating. "Lionel, stop looking so gloomy and come in," she said, turning away before I could respond. The living room looked different. A new leather sectional had replaced the old floral couch that had been there for over a decade. A large, flat-screen TV dominated one wall, and on the coffee table sat shopping bags from high-end department stores. Amanda lounged on the new couch, scrolling through her phone. She barely glanced up as I entered. "What happened?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady despite the hurricane of emotions inside me. "Mom, how could you sell my house without my knowledge or consent?" My mother sat down next to Amanda, physically aligning herself with my sister. "We had no choice, Lionel. Your sister was in trouble." "What kind of trouble justifies selling someone else's home?" I demanded. Amanda finally looked up from her phone, rolling her eyes as if I was overreacting. "I made some mistakes, okay? I got in over my head." Amanda accumulated some gambling debts, my mother explained, her voice softening when she turned to my sister. "It started small, just poker games online, but it escalated." "How much?" I asked. They exchanged glances, and Amanda muttered, $256,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. "And you sold my house to pay off her gambling debts? How is that even legal? You can't sell property that isn't yours." My mother had the decency to look uncomfortable for a moment. "Well, we had access to your safe. We signed the papers for you." "You forged my signature?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "That's fraud. That's a criminal offense." "Don't be so dramatic," Amanda snapped. "It's not like you're homeless. You have money saved. You can find another place." "But I am homeless right now," I said, gesturing wildly. "You took my home, the home I worked years to afford." My mother's expression hardened. Amanda was being threatened, Lionel. The people she owed money to were dangerous. They were going to hurt her if she didn't pay by last Friday. What were we supposed to do? "Anything but this," I shouted, my composure finally breaking. "You could have asked me for help. You could have called the police. You could have done literally anything except steal and sell my house." "Asked you for help?" Amanda scoffed. "Right. Like you would have just handed over $250,000. "We didn't have time to discuss options," my mother insisted. "These people wanted their money immediately. The house was the only asset valuable enough to cover the debt quickly." I paced the room, trying to understand their warped logic. "So, you sold my house, presumably for less than market value, since you needed to sell it so quickly. What did you even get for it?" $520,000, my mother admitted. "The market value was closer to $700,000, but we needed a cash buyer who could close immediately." I did the math quickly. So you paid Amanda's debt and had over $250,000 left. Where's that money? More uncomfortable glances between them. Then I noticed Amanda's wrist. A flashy new diamond tennis bracelet that certainly hadn't been there when I left for vacation. You've got to be kidding me, I breathed. You sold my house at a massive loss, and you're already spending the leftover money on jewelry, on a new TV and couch? We needed a few things, my mother said defensively. And Amanda deserved something nice after all the stress she's been through. The stress she's been through? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What about my stress? What about the fact that I no longer have a home because of her gambling addiction? Now you know what struggling feels like, Amanda sneered. Some of us haven't had everything handed to us on a silver platter. I stared at her, dumbfounded. Handed to me? I worked multiple jobs through college while you went to a private university on Mom's dime. I saved for years to buy that house. Your house is just a thing, Lionel, my mother said dismissively. Amanda could have been hurt. Family comes first. Clearly, I'm not considered part of this family, I replied, my voice breaking despite my efforts to stay strong. What's your plan here? What am I supposed to do now? My mother patted the couch beside her. You can stay here until you get back on your feet. The guest room is small, but it'll do temporarily. The casual way she offered this, as if it was a generous solution to a problem she had created, left me speechless. They truly didn't see anything wrong with what they had done. In their minds, Amanda's needs would always justify any action, no matter how destructive to me. You can stay with us, Amanda echoed, finally putting down her phone. Now you're homeless. She laughed, as if it was a joke we were all in on. Welcome to the real world, big brother. I looked at them both. My mother, who had always chosen Amanda over me, and my sister, who had been taught from childhood that her desires trumped everyone else's needs, and realized I was looking at strangers. These weren't people who loved me. These were people who saw me as nothing more than a resource to be used when convenient. I'll be staying at a hotel, I said quietly, turning to leave. Don't be ridiculous, my mother called after me. Why waste money on a hotel when you have family? I paused at the door and looked back at them. That's the question, isn't it? Do I have family? Because family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't make someone homeless and then mock them for it. As I walked to my car, I heard Amanda call out from the doorway. Stop being so self-righteous. It's not like you can do anything about it anyway. The sale is final. She was wrong. There had to be something I could do. I just needed to figure out what. The hotel room became my temporary home as days stretched into a week. Each morning, I woke up disoriented, reaching for my bedside lamp that wasn't there, momentarily forgetting that my entire life had been upended. Reality would crash back, and I'd lie staring at the popcorn ceiling, trying to summon the energy to face another day. I had called in sick to work for the first few days, unable to focus on architectural plans when my personal foundation had been so thoroughly shattered. When I finally returned, my performance suffered noticeably. I made careless errors, missed deadlines, and zoned out during client meetings. 2 weeks after returning from what should have been a rejuvenating vacation, I was called into my boss's office. Lionel, I'm concerned, Jack said, leaning forward across his desk. This isn't like you. You've always been one of our most reliable team members, but lately, he gestured vaguely. What's going on? I considered offering some vague excuse about personal issues, but the weight of carrying this burden alone suddenly felt unbearable. I told him everything. The theft, the forgery, the betrayal. His expression shifted from confusion to shock to outrage. That's criminal activity, he said when I finished. Have you spoken to a lawyer? I hadn't, partly because I was still processing the trauma, and partly because taking legal action meant accepting that my relationship with my mother and sister might be permanently severed. Despite everything, some childish part of me still hoped for reconciliation, for them to realize the magnitude of their betrayal and make amends. Jack gave me the name of a lawyer friend and insisted I take the afternoon off to consult with him. I understand you're going through hell right now, he said kindly. But I need to be honest. Your work is suffering. I can give you some leeway, but not indefinitely. We have clients counting on us. The lawyer's office was in a sleek downtown building, with views of Puget Sound. Paul Thornton was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. He listened to my story without interruption, taking occasional notes. "This is a clear case of fraud and forgery," he said when I finished. "You have grounds for both criminal charges and a civil lawsuit." "Against my own mother and sister?" I asked, the reality of that possibility sitting heavy in my stomach. "I understand your reluctance," Paul said. "But what they did wasn't a minor transgression. They stole your home through criminal means. There are serious consequences for such actions." "What kind of consequences? Forgery and fraud of this magnitude?" "Potentially years in prison for both of them." The thought of my mother, now in her 60s, in a prison cell made me physically ill, despite everything she had done. And Amanda, for all her flaws, was still my little sister. Could I really be responsible for sending them both to jail? "There's another complication," Paul continued. "You mentioned the house was sold to a young family who purchased in good faith." I nodded. "They have 2 small children. They had no idea the sale was fraudulent. That makes things messier. If you pursue legal action and win, that family could lose their home. They might have some recourse against your mother and sister, but it would mean lengthy legal battles for everyone involved." I left the law office with more questions than answers. On my walk back to the hotel, I received 3 missed calls from my mother and a text that read, "Why aren't you answering? We need to talk about your attitude." My attitude. As if I was the one who had done something wrong. That evening, my friend Trevor insisted on taking me out for drinks. We had been friends since college, and he was one of the few people I had told about the situation. "You look terrible," he said bluntly when he saw me. "Thanks. That's exactly what I needed to hear." "Sorry, man. I just mean, this is eating you alive. Have you considered just moving on? Insurance might cover some of it, and you have savings, right? Maybe it's not worth destroying your relationship with your family." I stared at him, wondering if I had somehow failed to convey the magnitude of what had happened. "They stole my home, Trevor. They forged my signature and sold my house without my knowledge or consent. How exactly does one move on from that?" Trevor looked uncomfortable. "I know it's awful. I just hate seeing you like this. And family is complicated. Sometimes it's easier to forgive than to fight." His words echoed in my head long after we parted ways. Was I being stubborn? Would it be better to simply accept what had happened and try to rebuild? The thought made anger flare hot in my chest. Why should I be the one to absorb this blow and move on? Why was the burden of forgiveness always placed on the person who had been wronged, rather than the ones who had inflicted the harm? The next day, I received a notification that some of my belongings had been moved to a storage unit. The message came from the family who had bought my house. They had found the notice with my contact information. They had been kind enough to pack up my personal items and clothes, though all the furniture had been included in the sale. Another piece of information my mother and sister had conveniently failed to mention. I drove to the storage facility that weekend, unlocking the small unit to find cardboard boxes haphazardly packed with my life. Books I had collected over years, family photos, the quilt my grandmother had made for me, clothes still on hangers, all unceremoniously stuffed into boxes with no regard for their significance or condition. As I sorted through the chaos, I came across my laptop, thankfully unharmed, and my external hard drive. On impulse, I checked my social media accounts and found myself looking at Amanda's profile. My blood ran cold as I scrolled through her recent posts. There she was, at a casino in Las Vegas, proudly displaying chips worth thousands of dollars. The post was dated 2 days ago, with the caption, "Back in the game, feeling lucky tonight." She had promised my mother she would stop gambling. That had been part of the justification for the extreme measure of selling my house, to give her a clean slate, a fresh start free from debt. And here she was, not even a month later, gambling again with what was almost certainly money from my house sale. I slammed the laptop shut, a new wave of anger washing over me. This wasn't just about the house anymore. This was about a lifetime of enabling Amanda's worst behaviors, while I was expected to stand by and support her unconditionally. It was about my mother's persistent refusal to hold my sister accountable for her actions, instead teaching her that someone else would always clean up her messes. As I continued sorting through the boxes, I came across a folder I didn't recognize. Opening it revealed a stack of letters addressed to me from years ago, all unopened. Letters from architecture internship programs I had applied to in college, including one from a prestigious firm in New York that I had never heard back from. The seal was broken on that one, and as I read it, my hands began to shake. It was an acceptance letter. I had been offered a position that could have launched my career in an entirely different trajectory, but I had never known because the letter had been intercepted. The pieces began to fall into place. My mother had always discouraged me from leaving Seattle, insisting that family should stay close. Had she deliberately hidden this opportunity from me to keep me nearby, available to support her and Amanda when needed? The revelation sparked something in me. If she had hidden this from me, what else might she have concealed over the years? What other opportunities or information had been kept from me to maintain the family dynamic that benefited everyone but me? As I drove back to the hotel with a few essential boxes, I made a decision. It was time to stop passively accepting the narrative that had been constructed around my life. It was time to dig deeper and uncover the full truth, no matter how painful it might be. The storage unit held more than just my hastily packed belongings. In a box labeled Lionel, School, I found childhood mementos, report cards, and at the very bottom, a manila envelope I didn't recognize. Inside was a stack of papers that appeared to be legal documents. The first page bore the heading Last Will and Testament of Thomas Edward Wells. My father's will. I sat on the concrete floor of the storage unit, confusion washing over me. I had been told repeatedly that my father didn't leave a will, that everything had gone to paying off debts. Yet here was a formally executed document, complete with notary seal and witness signatures. As I read through the pages, my hands began to tremble. My father had indeed left debts, but he had also left assets, including a cabin property on Lake Chelan that I had visited a few times as a child. According to the will, the cabin was to be held in trust until I turned 25, at which point it would transfer to my name. I had never received this inheritance. My mother had never even mentioned it after my father died. We had stopped visiting the cabin, and when I asked about it once, she told me it had been sold to pay off debts. The final page of the will included a handwritten note from my father. To my son Lionel, I've always admired your responsible nature and kind heart. This cabin has been in our family for generations, and I know you'll be a worthy steward of this legacy. Your future is bright, son. Never let anyone dim your light. Tears blurred my vision as I read his words. Words I should have read 9 years ago when I turned 25. Words that might have changed the course of my life had I known my father had such faith in me. Instead, they had been hidden away, along with my rightful inheritance. Back at the hotel, I spent hours researching property records for Chelan County. Sure enough, the cabin was still listed under a trust in my father's name. It had never been sold. According to tax records, the property taxes had been paid regularly for the past 20 years. Someone had been maintaining ownership of the property that should legally have been transferred to me 9 years ago. Further digging revealed that the cabin had been consistently rented out through a property management company. The rental income, which should have been mine since I turned 25, had been going somewhere, and I had a pretty good idea where. The next morning, I drove the nearly 3 hours to Lake Chelan, a resort area nestled in the mountains of central Washington. The drive gave me time to think, to process the magnitude of this new betrayal. Not only had my mother and sister stolen my house, but my mother had been stealing from me for years by withholding an inheritance that was rightfully mine. The cabin was located on the north shore of the lake, set back from the water on a wooded lot. As I pulled up the gravel driveway, memories flooded back. Summer weekends fishing with my father, roasting marshmallows over a campfire, falling asleep to the sound of waves lapping against the shore. This place had been in my family for generations, and it should have been mine for the past 9 years. The cabin looked well maintained, with a fresh coat of paint and new windows. A sign by the door read Lake Breeze Cabin, managed by Shalon Vacation Rentals. I called the number on the sign and was connected to the property manager. "Hi, I'm Lionel Wells," I said. "I believe I'm the legal owner of this property according to my father's will, but I've just discovered this fact. Could I speak with someone about the rental history?" There was a long pause on the other end. "Mr. Wells, we've been managing this property for almost 20 years for Judith Wells. She's listed as the trustee. She's my mother, and yes, she was the trustee until I turned 25. At that point, the property should have transferred to me, according to the terms of my father's will. I've just discovered that never happened." The manager, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, agreed to meet me at their office in town. There, she provided me with rental records going back 5 years, the furthest their digital system allowed. The cabin had been consistently rented for most of the year, bringing in between $2,000 and $3,000 monthly. Simple math told me that over 9 years, my mother had potentially collected over $200,000 in rental income that should have been mine. But the biggest shock came when the manager mentioned recent developments in the area. "The value of this property has increased significantly in the last 2 years, she explained. "The North Shore is being developed as a luxury resort area. Property values have tripled since the announcement." "What would the cabin be worth now?" I asked. She pulled up recent comparable sales. Given the lot size and lakefront access, easily $1.5 million, possibly more with the right buyer. The number hit me like a physical blow. My modest inheritance had transformed into a valuable asset, all while being kept secret from me. And based on some notes in their system, my mother had recently inquired about listing the property for sale. The drive back to Seattle felt surreal. In the span of 24 hours, I had discovered not only that I owned a valuable property, but that my mother had been lying to me for decades, withholding both my inheritance and significant rental income. Combined with the theft of my house, the pattern of exploitation was undeniable. Back at the hotel, I continued my investigation. I found the attorney who had handled my father's estate and, after explaining the situation, secured copies of all the original documents. The will clearly stated that the cabin property should have transferred to me at 25, with my mother serving as trustee only until that time. I also discovered something else. Bank records showing that during my college years, substantial withdrawals had been made from my father's life insurance policy to pay for Amanda's private university tuition. Meanwhile, I had been told the insurance money was gone, forcing me to work multiple jobs and take out student loans. The more I uncovered, the clearer the picture became. For 20 years, my mother had systematically diverted resources meant for me to benefit herself and Amanda. The house theft wasn't an isolated incident born of desperation. It was merely the latest and most brazen example of a lifetime pattern. That night, I received another text from my mother. "The family is having dinner on Sunday. You should come. It's time to move forward and stop dwelling on the past." Move forward. Stop dwelling on the past. As if selling my house was a minor disagreement rather than a criminal act. As if stealing my inheritance for 20 years was something I should simply get over. For the first time since discovering the initial betrayal, I felt something beyond pain and confusion. I felt clarity. This wasn't about saving my relationship with my mother and sister anymore. This was about justice, not just for the recent theft of my house, but for 2 decades of lies and manipulation. I called Paul Thornton, the lawyer, and scheduled an urgent appointment for the next day. It was time to develop a strategy that would hold my mother and sister accountable while securing what was rightfully mine. I wouldn't seek revenge. That wasn't who I wanted to be, but I would no longer be their victim either. As I prepared for bed, I glanced at the copy of my father's will on the hotel desk, at his handwritten note about never letting anyone dim my light. For too long, I had allowed my mother and sister to do exactly that. It was time to reclaim not just my property, but my power. The next morning, dawned clear and bright, a rarity for Seattle in spring. It felt symbolic somehow, as if the universe was acknowledging that light was finally being shed on decades of darkness. I met with Paul Thornton at his office, armed with all the documentation I had gathered about both the cabin inheritance and the house theft. "This changes everything," Paul said, as he reviewed the will and property records. "The cabin situation strengthens your position considerably. This isn't just about the recent fraud with your house. It's about a long-term pattern of financial exploitation." "What are my options?" I asked. "Several," he replied, leaning back in his chair. "We could file criminal charges for the house fraud. That would likely result in serious legal consequences for both your mother and sister. We could also pursue a civil case to recover damages, including the difference between the market value of your house and what it was sold for, plus the rental income from the cabin that should have been yours." "And the cabin itself?" "That's actually the most straightforward part," Paul explained. "The will is clear, and the transfer should have happened automatically when you turned 25. We can file to enforce the terms of the will and have the property officially transferred to your name. Your mother has been acting as trustee long after her legal authority to do so expired." I considered my options carefully. Part of me wanted justice in its most complete form: criminal charges, civil penalties, the works. But another part of me recoiled at the thought of my mother in prison at her age. Despite everything, I couldn't completely erase the familial bond. "I don't necessarily want them to go to jail," I admitted. "I just want what's rightfully mine, and I want them to understand the severity of what they've done." Paul nodded thoughtfully. "There may be a middle path. We could prepare all the documentation for criminal charges, but use it as leverage to negotiate a settlement. If they cooperate fully with returning your property and compensating you for damages, you could choose not to press criminal charges." Over the next week, I worked closely with Paul and his team to develop a comprehensive strategy. We filed the necessary paperwork to enforce my father's will and transfer the cabin property to my name. We documented all the rental income that should have been mine over the years. We calculated the financial damage from the undervalued sale of my house. We gathered evidence of the forgery, including having a handwriting expert confirm that the signatures on the sale documents weren't mine. Meanwhile, the texts and calls from my mother continued, growing increasingly demanding. "You can't ignore your family forever," one message read. "Amanda is worried about you. We should all talk like adults." I didn't respond to any of them. I needed to approach the confrontation from a position of strength, with all my evidence organized and my strategy in place. Emotional appeals would only cloud my judgment. During this time, I moved from the hotel to a furnished apartment with a month-to-month lease. It wasn't home, but it was a step up from living out of a suitcase. I returned to work with renewed focus, explaining to my boss that I was taking steps to resolve my personal situation. My performance improved as I channeled my energy into positive action rather than helpless anger. 3 weeks after discovering the will, I received a disturbing call from a real estate agent in Chelan. "Mr. Wells, I'm calling because there seems to be some confusion about a property listing. I have paperwork here signed by a Judith Wells to list a lakefront cabin for sale, but the county records show some recent filing activity that suggests a change in ownership might be pending." My heart raced. "When did she contact you?" "About listing the property." "Just yesterday. We're scheduled to sign the final listing agreement and begin marketing the property next week." I thanked the agent for the information and immediately called Paul. My mother was attempting to sell the cabin before it could be legally transferred to me. Was she planning to take the money and disappear? The thought seemed paranoid, but given her recent actions, I couldn't dismiss it. Paul agreed we needed to accelerate our timeline. "We'll request an emergency injunction to prevent any sale of the property pending resolution of the ownership dispute," he said. "And I think we need to move forward with the confrontation sooner rather than later." That evening, I received another call, this time from an unknown number. When I answered, a man's voice I didn't recognize asked, "Is this Lionel Wells?" "Yes. Who's calling?" "My name is Derek. I'm..." I'm a friend of your sister Amanda. I think you should know she's in trouble again." My stomach dropped. "What kind of trouble?" "Gambling. She told everyone she'd paid off her debts and was done with it. But she's been hitting the underground poker games again. She lost big last night. Like, really big. I'm worried about her. She mentioned something about selling some property to cover it, but she seemed desperate." After thanking Derek for the information, I sat in stunned silence. Despite everything, losing my house, the family conflict, the legal mess, Amanda was gambling again. And based on what this Derek had said, she and my mother were planning to sell the cabin to cover new gambling debts. I called Paul again, and we agreed to move up our confrontation to the next day. That night, I barely slept, mentally rehearsing what I would say, how I would present the evidence, how I would remain calm in the face of what would surely be denial and deflection. The next morning, I received a text from my mother that only confirmed our suspicions. "Lionel, I need to speak with you urgently about a family financial matter. Please call me as soon as possible." I didn't call. Instead, I reviewed the final strategy with Paul. He would accompany me to my mother's house with all our documentation. We would present the evidence, outline the potential criminal charges, and offer our settlement terms. If they refused to cooperate, we were prepared to proceed with both criminal and civil actions immediately. As we drove to my mother's house, Paul offered some final advice. "Stay calm, stick to the facts, and don't let them derail the conversation with emotional manipulation. Remember, you're in the right here, both legally and morally." I nodded, taking a deep breath as we pulled into the driveway. Amanda's car was there, as expected. This time, I didn't knock. I used my key and walked in, Paul following close behind. My mother and Amanda were sitting at the kitchen table, heads bent together over some papers. They looked up in surprise as we entered. "Lionel, finally," my mother said, quickly gathering up the papers. "Who's this?" "This is Paul Thornton, my attorney," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "We need to talk." My mother's face paled at the word attorney, but she quickly composed herself. "Don't be ridiculous, Lionel. We don't need lawyers for a family discussion." "I think we do," I said firmly, setting my briefcase on the table. "Considering you sold my house through forgery and fraud, and you've been withholding my inheritance for the past 9 years, legal representation seems appropriate." Amanda's eyes widened, darting between my mother and me. "What inheritance? What's he talking about, Mom?" The fact that Amanda seemed genuinely confused was interesting. Perhaps my mother hadn't shared all her secrets with her favorite child after all. "He's being dramatic," my mother said dismissively, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her hands as she pushed the papers she'd been reviewing into a folder. Lionel always had a flair for exaggeration. "I have copies of Dad's will," I said, opening my briefcase and removing the document. "The will that states I inherited the Lake Chelan cabin when I turned 25. The cabin you told me was sold years ago to pay off debts. The cabin you've been renting out and collecting income from for the past 9 years. The cabin you're currently trying to sell." Amanda turned to our mother, confusion evident on her face. "The cabin's still in the family? You told me Dad lost it in a bad investment before he died." My mother's face flushed. "This isn't the time or place for this discussion." "Actually, it's exactly the time and place," Paul interjected smoothly. "Mrs. Wells, we have documented evidence that you've been acting as trustee for a property that should have legally transferred to your son 9 years ago. We've also confirmed with the property management company that you've collected approximately $240,000 in rental income that rightfully belonged to Lionel." He placed another document on the table. "This is a filing we've already submitted to enforce the terms of the will and transfer the property to Lionel's name. We've also secured an emergency injunction preventing you from selling the property pending resolution of the ownership dispute." My mother's composure cracked slightly. "You don't understand. That cabin was the only security I had after your father died. I needed it to ensure Amanda's future." "My future?" Amanda interrupted. "You told me the cabin was gone. All those times I needed money for school, for rent, for everything. And you had rental income coming in from a property worth over $1 million? It was complicated, my mother said, not meeting Amanda's eyes. I was trying to protect both of you. By stealing from me? I asked quietly. By hiding my inheritance? By forging my signature to sell my house? That's not protection, Mom. That's theft. My mother's expression hardened. You've always been self-sufficient, Lionel. Amanda needed more support. The cabin income helped put her through college, helped her when she lost her job, helped her when she got into trouble. What would you have done with it? Added it to your savings? Bought a bigger house you don't need? It wasn't your decision to make, I replied, struggling to keep my voice level. That was my inheritance. Dad left it specifically to me. And even if you thought redistributing it was somehow justified, you should have been honest about it. You lied to me for 20 years. And you lied to me too, Amanda added, her voice rising. All those times I was drowning in debt, and you made me feel like we were barely getting by. You made me take out loans for grad school when there was money available. My mother looked between us, suddenly finding herself under attack from both children. Everything I've ever done has been for this family, she insisted. Sometimes that meant making difficult choices. Choices that consistently benefited Amanda at my expense, I pointed out. I found the acceptance letter from the architecture firm in New York, the one you never gave me. I saw the records showing Dad's life insurance paid for Amanda's private university while I worked 2 jobs and took out loans. And now selling my house to pay off her gambling debts? There's a pattern here, Mom. You always resented your sister, my mother snapped, her calm facade crumbling. From the day she was born, you were jealous of the attention she received. You're so much like your father. Cold, calculating, always keeping score. Dad wasn't cold, I said, surprised by the venom in her voice when she spoke of my father. He was responsible. He worked hard to provide for his family. He valued honesty and integrity, values you clearly don't share. Don't talk to me about your father's values, my mother hissed. You have no idea what our marriage was really like. He controlled everything, every penny, every decision. When he died, I finally had control over my own life, and I swore I would never let anyone dictate my choices again. The raw emotion in her voice took me aback. Was this really how she had seen my father? The man I remembered as kind and supportive, if somewhat reserved. So this was about control? I asked. Hiding my inheritance, intercepting my job offers, selling my house. It was all about maintaining control. It was about doing what was best for the family. For your version of family, I corrected. One where Amanda's needs always come first, and I'm just a resource to be used when convenient. Amanda had been unusually quiet, staring at the documents on the table. Is it true? She finally asked our mother. Did you really forge Lionel's signature to sell his house? Did you really hide Dad's will and keep Lionel's inheritance from him? My mother hesitated, then nodded slowly. I did what was necessary. Those loan sharks would have hurt you, Amanda. They were threatening you. The house was the fastest way to get the money. And you never even considered asking me for help? I asked. Having an honest conversation about the situation? Giving me the chance to help my sister without losing my home? You would have judged her, my mother insisted. You would have lectured her about responsibility and made her feel worse than she already did. You don't know that because you never gave me the chance, I said. You made assumptions about how I would react and then used those assumptions to justify stealing from me. Paul cleared his throat, bringing the conversation back to the legal matters at hand. Mrs. Wells, Miss Wells, we're prepared to file criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and theft. The evidence is quite clear, and the penalties for such actions are severe. However, Lionel has authorized me to present an alternative. He placed a document on the table. This is a settlement agreement. If you both sign it and comply with all terms, Lionel is willing to forego pressing criminal charges. My mother eyed the document suspiciously. What are the terms? First, immediate acknowledgement that the cabin property belongs solely to Lionel. with no further attempts to contest ownership or interfere with the property, Paul explained. Second, a structured repayment plan for the rental income that was wrongfully collected over the past 9 years, to be paid monthly over a 5-year period. I don't have that kind of money, my mother protested. The agreement includes reasonable monthly payments based on your income, I assured her. I'm not trying to bankrupt you, Mom. I just want what's rightfully mine. Third, Paul continued, a formal acknowledgement of the wrongful sale of Lionel's house and an agreement to pay the difference between the market value and the sale price, also structured over time. And finally, I added, Amanda needs to enter a legitimate gambling addiction treatment program and provide proof of ongoing participation. Amanda looked up, anger flashing in her eyes. You can't force me into treatment. You stole from me to pay off gambling debts, and then immediately went back to gambling, I reminded her. If you want to avoid criminal charges that could send you to prison, getting help for your addiction seems like a reasonable condition. This is ridiculous, my mother scoffed. You'd never actually press charges against your own family. You're bluffing. Paul slid another document across the table. This is the criminal complaint, already prepared. If you don't sign the settlement agreement, I'll file this with the district attorney's office tomorrow morning. Mrs. Wells, given your age and lack of prior criminal record, you might receive some leniency from the court. But make no mistake, forgery and fraud of this magnitude typically result in prison sentences. My mother stared at the document, then at me. You'd really send your own mother to jail? After everything I've done for you? What exactly have you done for me, Mom? I asked quietly. You hid my inheritance, intercepted career opportunities, diverted funds, meant for my education to Amanda, and stole my house. Tell me, what should I be grateful for? A heavy silence fell over the room. Amanda was the first to break it. I'll sign, she said, her voice small. I'll do the treatment program. I know I need help. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. I'm sorry, Lionel. I never thought it would go this far. I never thought Mom would sell your house. When she suggested it, I should have said no. Her apology, the first genuine one I'd received, caught me off guard. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. My mother looked between us, perhaps realizing for the first time that she had lost the unconditional support of both her children. You're just like your father, she said to me, her voice bitter. Always so righteous. Always so sure you know what's best. Sign the agreement, Mom, I said firmly, or we'll let the courts decide what happens next. She stared at me for a long moment, searching my face for any sign of wavering. Finding none, she picked up the pen Paul offered and signed the document with a sharp, angry scrawl. As Paul witnessed and notarized the signatures, I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a profound sadness for what my family had become and what it might have been if honesty and respect had guided our relationships instead of manipulation and favoritism. We'll be in touch regarding the payment schedule and treatment program verification, Paul said, gathering the documents. In the meantime, the cabin property will be officially transferred to Lionel's name within the week. As we prepared to leave, Amanda touched my arm. Lionel, can we talk sometime? Just the two of us? I hesitated, then nodded. Not today. I need some time. But yes, eventually. My mother remained silent, not meeting my eyes as we left. Walking to the car, I felt as though I had lost, and found myself simultaneously cutting ties with the unhealthy family dynamic that had defined my life for so long, but reclaiming my worth and my right to be treated with basic respect. You did well in there, Paul said as we drove away. Standing up to family is one of the hardest things anyone can do. I nodded, watching my childhood home recede in the side mirror. It no longer felt like home. Perhaps it never truly had been. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope that something better lay ahead. Summer turned to fall, and with the changing season came transformation in my life as well. 3 months had passed since the confrontation with my mother and sister, and while the wounds were still tender, healing had begun. The Lake Chelan cabin was officially mine now, The transfer of ownership complete. I had visited several times, reacquainting myself with the property that should have been part of my life for the past 9 years. Each visit strengthened my connection to my father's memory, especially as I discovered little touches that bore his handiwork. The hand-carved railings on the deck, the stone fireplace he had built himself, the wooden bench overlooking the lake where he used to sit and watch the sunset. During my most recent visit, I had met with a real estate developer who was interested in purchasing some of the surrounding properties for a luxury resort project. They had made a generous offer for my cabin as well, nearly $2 million, a testament to how valuable the location had become. I had declined to sell but had negotiated easement rights that would bring additional income without sacrificing ownership of my family legacy. With the cabin secured and its value established, I had been able to obtain a home equity loan that allowed me to purchase a new house in Seattle. It wasn't the same as my old Craftsman, but in some ways, it was better. A mid-century modern with large windows and an open floor plan that I was gradually making my own. Most importantly, it was mine, purchased with clear eyes and no shadows of family obligation hanging over it. The most surprising development had been my relationship with Amanda. True to her word, she had entered a comprehensive gambling addiction treatment program, weekly therapy sessions, Gamblers Anonymous meetings, and a financial accountability plan were slowly helping her rebuild her life on more solid ground. 2 months after the confrontation, she had asked to meet for coffee. I had agreed with some trepidation, unsure what to expect. She had arrived early, visibly nervous, clutching her cup with both hands. "I've been learning a lot in therapy," she had begun awkwardly. "About why I gamble, about the rush it gives me, about how I've used it to feel special, I guess, in control of my own destiny." I had nodded, waiting for her to continue. "But I'm also learning about how Mom and I have treated you over the years," she had continued, her voice catching. "How we've taken your reliability and responsibility for granted. How we've exploited your success, while resenting you for it at the same time." She had looked up, tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Lionel. I know that doesn't fix anything. But I need you to know that I understand now what we did to you, and I'm truly deeply sorry." Her apology had felt different from the one offered under duress during the confrontation, more genuine, more self-aware. We had talked for hours that day, really talked, perhaps for the first time in our adult lives, about our childhood, about the dynamic our mother had created between us, about the resentments and misunderstandings that had shaped our relationship. Since then, we had been cautiously rebuilding our connection. Weekly coffee meetings had evolved into occasional dinners and even a day trip to explore the suburbs where we had grown up. The trust wasn't fully restored. That would take time and consistent evidence of change. But we were creating something new from the ashes of our old relationship, something potentially healthier and more authentic. My mother was a different story. She had complied with the legal settlement, making the required monthly payments without fail, but emotionally, she remained distant and resentful. Our interactions were limited to necessary communications about the settlement terms, conducted primarily through email. I had suggested family therapy, thinking it might help us process the decades of dysfunction. But she had refused, still unable or unwilling to acknowledge the harmful patterns she had established. Her refusal had hurt, but I was learning to accept that I couldn't control her response, only my own. I had left the door open for reconciliation if she ever decided to walk through it, but I no longer put my life on hold waiting for her approval or recognition. With Amanda's encouragement, my mother had finally agreed to see a therapist on her own. Whether it would lead to genuine change remained to be seen, but it was a step I wouldn't have thought possible 6 months ago. Today, as I arranged photographs in my new living room, I came across an old picture of my father holding me on his shoulders at the lake cabin. His smile was wide, his eyes crinkled with joy as he looked up at me. I placed it prominently on the mantel, a reminder of where I had come from and the values I wanted to carry forward. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Amanda holding a housewarming gift, a plant in a handmade ceramic pot. "It's a peace lily," she said with a small smile. The florist said they're good for purifying the air. I thought. Well, it seemed appropriate somehow. I invited her in, giving her a tour of the house with its half-unpacked boxes and partially assembled furniture. We ended up on the back deck with glasses of iced tea, watching the October sun cast long shadows across the yard. "Do you think Mom will ever really understand what she did?" Amanda asked, after a comfortable silence. I considered the question carefully. I don't know. She spent so many years justifying her actions that it might be too painful to acknowledge the harm now. But I hope therapy helps her see things differently. Amanda nodded. I used to think she was protecting me, you know. But I've realized she was actually keeping me dependent on her. Every time I failed, she was there to bail me out, which meant I never had to face consequences or learn to stand on my own. While I was expected to stand on my own from day one, I added. Exactly. Neither approach was healthy. She didn't do either of us any favors. Amanda looked at me directly. I want you to know, I'm committed to making my payments to you too, not just the ones Mom is responsible for. I'm working with my financial counselor to set up a payment plan once I'm more stable. I appreciate that, I said, genuinely touched by her commitment to making amends. Later that evening, after Amanda had left, I sat alone in my new living room, reflecting on the journey of the past 6 months. Losing my house had been devastating, but it had forced me to confront the unhealthy dynamics that had shaped my entire life. If my mother hadn't taken such a drastic action, would I ever have discovered the truth about my inheritance? Would I ever have broken free from the pattern of being used and taken for granted? Sometimes the most painful experiences carry within them the seeds of necessary change. My mother's betrayal had ultimately led to a kind of liberation, from false obligations, from one-sided relationships, from a lifetime of putting others' needs before my own, without reciprocation. I picked up my phone, and after a moment's hesitation, typed a message to my mother. The door is always open when you're ready to talk. Real talk. Not just about the settlement. I hope you're finding some peace in therapy. I didn't expect a response, and I didn't need one. The message was as much for me as it was for her. A reminder that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting, and that boundaries can coexist with compassion. 1 year later, I stood on the dock at the Lake Chelan cabin, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. The cabin had become my weekend retreat, a place to reconnect with nature and with myself. I had maintained it much as my father had, making only necessary updates while preserving its rustic charm. Amanda was doing well in her recovery, recently celebrating 1 year without gambling. She had found a job as an administrative assistant at a nonprofit organization, not as glamorous as some of her previous positions, but steady and fulfilling in ways she was just beginning to appreciate. My mother and I had eventually started family therapy together, though progress was slow and conversations often difficult. She struggled to acknowledge the harm her actions had caused, but small breakthroughs happened occasionally. Just last week, she had admitted that her treatment of me had been influenced by her own unresolved issues with my father, projecting onto me the resentments she had never addressed with him. It wasn't a full apology, but it was a step toward honesty, and I valued that more than easy forgiveness without true understanding. Professionally, I had thrived. The focus and determination I had developed through navigating the family crisis had translated into a promotion at work. I now led my own team of architectural consultants, mentoring younger professionals with an emphasis on work-life balance that I had never prioritized for myself before. As the last light faded from the sky, I thought about how different my life looked now compared to 18 months ago. I had lost a house but gained clarity. I had been betrayed by family but found authentic connection. I had faced painful truths but emerged with greater self-knowledge and strength. The cabin that should have been mine all along had become not just a physical inheritance, but a symbol of reclaiming what was rightfully mine. Not just property, but dignity, boundaries, and self-respect. My father's words from his will echoed in my mind. Never let anyone dim your light. For years, I had allowed exactly that to happen, accepting less than I deserved in the name of family peace. Now I understood that real family, whether blood relations or chosen connections, should amplify your light, not diminish it. Real love doesn't exploit or manipulate. It supports and respects. These were the values I would carry forward, the lessons purchased at great cost but worth every painful penny. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I made a silent promise to myself. I would honor my father's legacy, not just by preserving the cabin he loved, but by living with the integrity and self-respect he had tried to instill in me. And I would build new relationships, with Amanda, perhaps eventually with my mother, and with friends and future family, founded on mutual respect rather than obligation or exploitation. The house my mother sold had been just a structure. What I had built since then was a home for my spirit, boundaries that protected my worth, wisdom that guided my choices, and the courage to stand firm in my truth, even when it meant standing alone. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what you truly need. In my case, it was the painful but necessary pathway to finding myself. I hope this story resonates with those of you who have experienced family betrayal or have struggled to establish healthy boundaries with loved ones. Remember that your worth isn't determined by how much you sacrifice for others, but by how authentically you honor your own truth. Have you ever had to establish difficult boundaries with family? What helped you find the strength to stand up for yourself? Please share your experiences in the comments below. If you found value in this story, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content that explores the complicated reality of family dynamics and personal growth. And if you know someone who might benefit from hearing this journey, please share it with them. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it brings some comfort and courage to those walking similar paths. Remember, the most important home you'll ever build is the one inside yourself. Make sure its foundation is strong.